Hello from Jonathan and me, and welcome to a special edition of Anglia Tonight.
On the day the government made the biggest cuts to public spending since the Second World War. The Chancellor's announced plans to make £81 billion of savings over the next 4 years. But what does it all mean for us here in the East? Well, here are some of the key headlines. Schools and health services are protected from the worst. But there are big cuts to welfare, councils and police. We'll pay more to use buses, trains and many local services. But there's one piece of good news for the region. After decades of campaigning for the dualling of the A11 on the Norfolk-Suffolk border, that will go ahead. Well, one place that could be heavily affected by the cuts is Peterborough. The City Council there is a unitary authority, a single tier of administration which looks after all local government services. Well, they've already begun the number crunching, and our correspondent Neil Bradford is in the council chambers for us tonight. Neil, what's the outlook there in Peterborough?
Well, here in Peterborough, they've actually prepared for a worst-case scenario of cuts of up to 40%. But ultimately, it will be the councillors in this council chamber that will decide their strategy by the end of the month. But Peterborough will be affected by today's comprehensive spending review because between 18 and 20,000 people in the city work in the public sector. That's 1 in 10 of the population. Nearly 20,000 people here claim benefits, 2% above the national average. And the unemployment rate in the city is 4.3%, with just under 5,000 people claiming job seekers allowance. So today's comprehensive spending review will have wide-ranging impact, not just in Peterborough, but right across the region.
It began like any other day, but today has changed all of our tomorrows. From schools to policing to healthcare, there is barely a part of our daily lives unaffected by today's spending review, the biggest cut in public spending in decades. Even in areas like social care, where more money is being promised, there are still concerns that it may not be enough. Residents of Heatherset Hall Care Home in Norfolk are worried that fees will have to go up, but there's a feeling that something had to be done.
You just have to learn to deal with it, don't you? I mean, there's nothing else you can do.
I do really think that they will be fair, but on the other hand, nobody likes any cuts.
Nowhere was there more interest in what the Chancellor had to say than at the region's town halls.
For local government, the deficit we have inherited means an unavoidably challenging settlement. There will be overall savings in fundings to councils of 7.1% a year for 4 years.
The Chancellor's words were never going to be popular, but at Peterborough City Council, where staff had gathered to watch the announcement, there was some relief that things were not as bad as they could have been.
I've never come across this level of cuts announced by a government, but we've been planning for it. It could have been worse, it could have been better. I'm relieved at least we know something and start planning with a bit more certainty over the next few months.
Finishing her school day in Ipswich, Terry Kelversbert was collected by her father, Paul. He relies on money he gets from the government to look after her. The 14-year-old suffered severe burns in a house fire when she was just 2. Paul believes the vulnerable shouldn't be the ones to suffer.
I think it's quite shocking, really, in one way, because it's people like me, and there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people that do, got carers, especially carers and things, which is saving the government quite a lot of money, really, because a lot of it is done unpaid. And I think they've hit the poorest people, really.
Today it's all about the big numbers. Government funding for the police will be cut by a fifth in real terms over the next 4 years.
Well, Norfolk and Suffolk covers a huge geographic area, and consequently, with reducing numbers of people, it may be that it takes longer to attend incidents, for example, because there's more distance to travel.
There is some good news: dualling of the A11 in Suffolk after decades of campaigning, and a new molecular science lab for Cambridge, confirming the city's biotech brilliance. But elsewhere, we pay for it. The cap on rail fares is being lifted, meaning ticket prices could go up by nearly 8% by 2012. There's a 20% cut in bus subsidies, which is likely to affect local services. Tolls on the Dartford crossing will go up to £2.50, and a number of local magistrates' courts will close. Schools escape the worst of the cuts, and classroom spending has been protected. But for the pupils, they will be growing up in a world where public money is tight.
Well, I'm now joined by the Deputy Leader of Peterborough City Council, Councillor Matthew Lee. Councillor Lee, first of all, let's be clear about this. This is better news than you're expecting, but it's still bad news for the taxpayer of Peterborough, isn't it?
Well, we've been modelling between 25 and 40% cuts. We're waiting for a lot more detail yet, because these are just headline figures. It's going to be days and weeks before we know. We're financed from various parts of national government. So we're going to publish our details on the 29th. We're going to ask the public to comment on them. There's going to be our best view of what we can do. We're going to take...
Can you give any indication of what's going to be cut? Because clearly services are going to be cut, aren't they?
We are going to absolutely concentrate on back office. We have to do that. We're going to maintain the front of house service as much as we can and minimise the effect on the public. But there are going to be effects. There are services that people see now and they're going to change. And we've been doing this for a number of years. We're going to continue and make that work harder for us, and we're going to deliver, and we're pleased to play our part in, lowering the national debt, and we're pleased that the government is trying to make this as fair as possible.
What our viewers want to know, really, is are you going to try and protect those frontline services? You say you will, but can you guarantee that you will?
Well, we've been doing that for a number of years. We've always tried to protect frontline services, particularly when they affect the vulnerable in society. We will continue to do that as much as we can, and we'll publish our actual details on the 29th. We're going to be one of the first councils in the country to do this. We've been working hard for the last 3 or 4 months, and people will then be able to see and comment on it on the 29th.
OK, Councillor Matthew Lee, thank you very much indeed. And as you heard there, the strategy for how Peterborough City Council is going to deal with this cut in funding will be announced at the end of the month.
OK, for now, Neil, thanks very much. Well, we'd like to hear from you. Are you worried about the impact of cuts? Is the government doing the right thing?
You can email your thoughts to us right now at jonathanandbecky@itv.com. We're going to try and read out some of your thoughts before the end of the programme as well. Now, we heard in Neil's report that among the cuts there were a few snippets of good news in the Chancellor's statement. One of those was confirmation that the final single carriageway section of the A11 will now be widened after all.
It's taken decades to persuade a government to dual the stretch near the Norfolk-Suffolk border. Business leaders are delighted. They say it will bring millions of pounds into the local economy, as Elodie Harper reports.
It's taken 40 years and a constant clamour from campaigners to get the A11 dualled.
To get that traffic out of towns and villages onto purpose-built modern roads.
Mentality, keep everyone out of Norfolk. That's out of the window.
I think it's very important for industry in this county and as a whole of the area.
This 9-mile stretch of single carriageway on East Anglia's main artery has become so infamous that today's announcement raised one of the only cheers for the Chancellor's spending review.
In the east of England, colleagues will be delighted to know that the A11 to Norwich will be upgraded. And around...
The A11 is the main route in and out of Norfolk. It goes through Suffolk and Cambridgeshire, joining the A14 and the M11, which then link East Anglia to the Midlands and London. That whole network is dualled, except the stretch of the A11 between Barton Mills and Thetford. Now £134 million will be spent on widening it and building a bypass around Elvedon.
This section of the A11 at Elvedon is a notorious bottleneck. Not only is it single carriageway, but motorists also have to navigate traffic lights and the 40-mile-hour speed limit to get through the village.
It's a bottleneck Paul Grayson has become all too familiar with during his 20 years as a haulier. He can spend as much as an hour on the 9-mile stretch of road.
People are going to start to want to come to East Anglia, into Thetford, Norwich or wherever, to set up for their businesses and that, but they're not doing it at the moment because of this stretch of road.
Business leaders believe the dualling of the A11 will bring in £500 million to the local economy.
I think it's a great credit to all those people who've been involved, who've kept going, who've kept the lobbying going, who've made sure that every government minister knows that Norfolk has been united behind its desire to get this very necessary improvement to our infrastructure.
On a day darkened by so many cuts, Norfolk MPs still couldn't let this moment pass without a small celebration. But campaigners for improving the A14 were disappointed. The £1 billion scheme to widen the road at Huntingdon has been withdrawn indefinitely. The government described it as simply unaffordable. Elodie Harper, Anglia News, Thetford.